Okay, so Zelensky's ceasefire idea, this is big, right? A potential turning point in the Ukraine war, maybe.
It's definitely causing a stir.
Yeah, no kidding.
He gave this interview to Sky News recently, and
Yeah,
it's got everyone talking.
I bet.
We've got excerpts from that Sky News article,
Oh, cool.
and well, the online world is buzzing with opinions.
Yeah, I was just looking at this Reddit thread, and let's just say there are some strong opinions out there for sure.
I bet.
But let's back up a sec.
Sure.
Can you break down, like, exactly what Zelensky is proposing here?
Okay, so basically he's saying that a ceasefire could happen if NATO quickly offered membership to the parts of Ukraine
Okay.
that are under Kyiv's control right now.
So the unoccupied area.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And his thinking is that this would create a secure environment for negotiations about the occupied territories.
Later on.
Right, exactly, like down the line.
I see.
So it's kind of like saying, okay, let's hit pause on the fighting and focus on diplomacy.
Yeah.
But with the security of NATO membership for those unoccupied areas.
Gotcha. So it's like a trade-off almost.
Yeah, you can see it that way.
Okay.
And it's really important to note here that he's talking about Ukraine joining NATO with its internationally recognized borders.
And that includes.
The occupied territories, yeah.
Okay, so that's where things get a little tricky, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Because this seems pretty different from what Zelensky has been saying before. Like, he's
Uh-huh.
been adamant about not giving up any Ukrainian territory to Russia.
You're absolutely right. This is the first time he's publicly even hinted at a ceasefire deal that would involve Russia keeping some Ukrainian territory.
Okay, so even if it's just temporary,
Yeah, even if it's framed as a temporary thing.
that's a big deal.
Huge. That's why everyone's talking about it.
Well, let's talk about those reactions then.
Okay.
I mean, some people in this Reddit thread are all for it. Like, let's stop the bloodshed and figure out the rest later. But others are like, hold on a second, you know?
Yeah, you see a lot of skepticism.
Yeah.
A lot of concern about whether this just gives Russia a chance to, like, regroup and rearm
And then what?
and then maybe launch another offensive later on down the road.
It's a legitimate concern.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about Russia's history,
Yeah.
like their track record with territorial ambition.
Some people are bringing up Crimea,
Yeah, there are definitely parallels there.
which, you know, if we're being honest, that really changed things.
It totally did.
It destroyed a lot of trust.
For sure.
And speaking of trust, can we even talk about a ceasefire without talking about Putin?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Like, has he said anything to suggest that he's open to this?
Well, Russia's official stance hasn't changed at all.
Okay.
They're still demanding territorial concessions from Ukraine.
As a precondition for talks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So right from the start, you've got this clash of perspectives.
Yeah. Zelensky wants NATO membership. Putin wants land.
Yeah.
It feels like we're stuck.
It does have that stalemate feeling.
And then on top of that, there's the whole NATO membership thing. There's that rule about not admitting countries that are at war, right?
Yeah, that's a major obstacle.
So how does that even work?
Well, it's tricky. It's like trying to solve a puzzle.
Yeah.
The missing piece.
And then you throw the U.S. election into the mix.
Oh, yeah. That adds another layer of complexity.
Zelensky even said himself that he wants to work with whoever the next U.S. president is.
He did, and he's already met with one of the candidates.
Trump.
Yeah.
Which, you know, if he wins,
Who knows what could happen?
things could get even more complicated.
Absolutely.
So we've got Zelensky's bold idea, the initial reactions, and a whole lot of unknowns. But there's so much more to unpack here.
Definitely. We need to look at the potential consequences for Ukraine, for Russia.
And for the world, really.
Right, for the whole global landscape.
And we can't forget the history here.
Absolutely.
We need to understand how we got to this point.
It's all connected.
And that's what we'll be doing in part 2 of this deep dive. So stay tuned.
It's going to be a wild ride. So let's say Zelensky's proposal actually goes somewhere.
Okay.
What could it mean for Ukraine?
Well, on the one hand, you've got the promise of NATO protection,
Right.
which they've wanted for a long time.
For sure.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
it means those occupied territories are basically off limits.
At least for now.
Right. For the time being.
It raises some really tough questions.
Yeah.
About what a true victory looks like. And what sacrifices are okay to make for peace.
I can see that.
Some people would say that giving up any territory
Uh-huh.
is like betraying the people who fought and died for Ukraine.
Yeah, you see that sentiment in the Reddit thread.
Definitely.
People are really struggling with that idea.
It's a deeply emotional issue.
Absolutely.
But then there are others who say that NATO membership
Yeah.
would actually make Ukraine stronger in the long run.
Okay.
and give them more leverage to maybe get those territories back later.
Through diplomacy?
Exactly.
So it's a long game.
Yeah.
Focus on security now and hope to reclaim the land later. But what about Russia? What's in it for Putin?
That's the million-dollar question.
Would he even consider this?
It seems unlikely on the surface.
Yeah, because
He's been very clear about this being about Russia's historical claims.
right, and their security interests.
Exactly. And he wants those occupied territories recognized as part of Russia.
So we're back to that clash of perspectives.
Yeah, Zelenskyy wants NATO. Putin wants land.
Total stalemate.
It seems that way. But we have to remember that Putin's not operating in a vacuum.
What do you mean?
Well, the sanctions are hurting the Russian economy.
That's true.
And there are rumors that people in Russia are getting unhappy.
About the war.
Yeah, about the costs.
Both human and financials.
Exactly.
Some of the comments on Reddit are suggesting that this could weaken Putin's position.
It's possible.
That a long war could hurt him politically.
It's definitely something to think about.
So maybe a ceasefire would be a way for him to save face.
Yeah, declare victory.
And quiet down the critics at home.
Potentially.
So it's a gamble for both sides.
Absolutely.
Zelensky's playing the long game.
Right. Hoping NATO membership will eventually tip the scales.
And Putin might be looking for a way out.
A way to end a costly and unpopular war.
And then there's the global implications.
Oh, yeah. This would have ripple effects everywhere.
Especially for NATO.
Definitely.
Bringing Ukraine into the alliance.
That would be a huge step.
And it could put them in direct conflict with Russia.
It's a risky move.
Big time.
They'd have to think very carefully about the consequences.
Yeah.
Some would say NATO has a moral obligation to support Ukraine.
To stop Russia from doing this again.
Exactly. But others would say it's too dangerous.
That it could escalate things.
And maybe even lead to a wider war.
You see both sides of that in the Reddit thread.
Yeah, it's a tough call.
So much at stake.
The future of Ukraine, the stability of Europe.
Even the global balance of power.
It's all on the line.
It all comes back to that question.
Would this deal actually bring peace?
Or would it just set the stage for another conflict down the road?
It's impossible to say for sure.
Yeah, too many unknowns.
But one thing's for certain.
What's that?
Any lasting solution has to address the root causes of the conflict.
Which goes way deeper than just land disputes.
We're talking about historical grievances.
Cultural divisions.
Totally different visions for the future of Europe.
It's a tangled mess.
A web of competing interests and ideologies.
That have been building for centuries.
Exactly. And to really understand what's happening here,
yeah,
we need to look at the historical context.
Which is what we're going to do in part 3 of this deep dive.
Unraveling the history that led us to this point.
And maybe shedding some light on the path ahead. So stay tuned. All right, so we've talked about Zelensky's proposal, the reactions to it, and all potential consequences.
Right.
But to really understand this whole situation, we got to go back in time.
You're absolutely right.
This conflict, it's not just about what's happening right now. It's about centuries of history.
A really complicated history between Russia and Ukraine.
And you see that in the online discussions, too.
Oh, definitely.
That Reddit thread we keep mentioning, people are bringing up all sorts of historical events.
All connected.
Like the Soviet era.
Right.
Things like the Holodomor.
The forced famine in the 1930s.
A lot of Ukrainians see that as a deliberate act of genocide.
Yeah, a really dark chapter.
It shows you how deep the mistrust goes.
I think it goes way back.
And then more recently, you have the annexation of Crimea.
In 2015.
That was a huge turning point.
Definitely.
I mean, before that, there were a lot of pro-Russian sentiments in Ukraine.
Especially in the east.
But after Crimea, things changed.
People started to feel more Ukrainian, more united.
It was like a wake-up call.
Yeah, it showed everyone what Putin was willing to do.
To use force to get what he wants.
Yes.
And that brings us to Zelenskyy and his proposal.
And the desire for NATO membership.
For a lot of Ukrainians, joining NATO is about security.
It's about protection from Russia.
It's about aligning themselves with the West.
With democracy.
Breaking away from Russia's influence.
Exactly.
So Zelensky's saying, give us NATO and we'll figure out the rest later.
It's a bold move.
But would NATO actually do it?
That's the big question.
Knowing it could lead to a war with Russia.
It's a huge risk.
And what about the people in those occupied territories?
What happens to them?
How do you protect their rights?
There are no easy answers.
So many complicated questions.
This conflict, it's so layered.
Historical baggage, political maneuvering.
The hopes and fears of millions of people.
We've tried to explore all of it in this deep dive.
The different perspectives, the history.
And potential consequences.
But there's still so much we don't know.
And that's the thing about these complex issues.
There's no single right answer.
No easy solution.
It's about understanding the nuances
Thinking critically.
and engaging with different viewpoints.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions.
Because the future of Ukraine, and maybe even the world, depends on it.